29 years old, Steve Perry was on the edge of giving up. He had spent years chasing a dream that seemed just out of reach. Failed bands, rejected demos, nights wondering if his voice would ever find the stage it deserved. And then one night changed everything. It wasn't in a stadium. It wasn't on live television. It was in a small San Francisco club called the Old Waldorf, a place where barely a few hundred people could squeeze in. The band on stage was Journey, a group with world-class musicians, but no real hit songs to keep their record label interested. They were talented but running out of time. When Perry stepped up to the microphone, the crowd didn't know his name. He looked ordinary. Dark hair, simple shirt, nervous energy. No one could have guessed what was about to happen. But the moment he sang, conversations stopped mid-sentence, heads turned, and those few hundred strangers realized they were witnessing something they'd never forget. That night didn't just save Journey. It didn't just launch Steve Perry's career. It reshaped the sound of arena rock and gave the world songs that decades later would still echo in stadiums, TV shows, and late-night sing-alongs. How did one unknown 29-year-old rewrite rock history in a single night, and why does that moment still matter today? Stay with me, because this is the story of the voice that almost never got heard. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to RetroWaves. This is where you'll hear the untold stories, the heartbreaks, the comebacks, and the nights that changed music forever. Hit that button, join our community, and never miss the next chapter in rock history. The mid-1970s. Journey was a band in search of itself. Founded by former Santana guitarist Neil Schon, keyboardist Greg Rowley, bassist Ross Valory, and drummer Ainsley Dunbar, they had the kind of technical skill other musicians envied. Their early albums were filled with complex solos, shifting time signatures, and long instrumental jams. It was music that impressed critics but left everyday listeners confused. The sales reflected that reality. Their first 3 records barely made a dent on the charts. For Columbia Records, the label that had invested heavily in them, it was a major concern. Behind closed doors, executives warned the band, if you don't deliver songs that can get on the radio, there may not be a next record. Inside the group, arguments broke out. Some members wanted to stick to their progressive roots. Others admitted the truth: without a change, Journey would fade away. But what change could possibly save them? Then, through industry connections, came the name of a singer no one had heard of, Steve Perry, a small-town kid from Hanford, California, who had spent most of his 20s moving from band to band, waiting for a break that never seemed to come. By 29, he was on the verge of walking away from music completely. Columbia believed Perry's voice could be the missing piece, but the band wasn't convinced. They had already built an identity, and bringing in a new frontman felt risky. Would fans accept him? Would the band even survive the shift? Those questions would all be answered in one unforgettable night at the Old Waldorf in San Francisco, the night Steve Perry walked on stage and made rock history. Before Steve Perry could even set foot on stage, he had to prove himself in the rehearsal room. Columbia Records pushed hard for him. They had heard Perry's demos and knew his soaring tenor could cut through radio the way Journey's music never had before. But the band, tight-knit, protective of their sound, wasn't so sure. Imagine being Perry, 29 years old, exhausted by years of rejection, standing in front of musicians who had already been touring the world. He wasn't famous, he wasn't rich. To them, he was just another hopeful singer. But then he opened his mouth. From the very first notes, the room shifted. Perry's voice wasn't just powerful, it was emotional. He could hit the high notes with ease, but more importantly, he could make you feel them. By the time he finished, there was no denying it. Journey had found something they never had before, a frontman who could turn their technical brilliance into songs people would actually remember. Still, doubts lingered. Would hardcore fans accept a new singer? Could Perry survive the pressure of carrying a band's future on his shoulders? Those doubts would be tested soon, on a night no one saw coming. The first show with Steve Perry wasn't in an arena. It wasn't broadcast live. It was at a small San Francisco club, the Old Waldorf. The audience expected the same Journey they'd always seen: long instrumental jams, Greg Rowley handling most of the vocals, a band more admired by musicians than loved by the masses. But as the lights dimmed, a new figure walked out. Slim, dark-haired, dressed simply. He didn't look like a rock god. He looked like a kid who had just stepped in from the crowd. And then he sang. They started with lights, Perry's voice soared over Neil Sean's guitar, golden and effortless. Conversation stopped. Strangers turned to each other, eyebrows raised, as if silently asking, "Who is this guy?" By the time they launched into Wheel in the Sky, even the skeptics in the back leaned forward. Perry wasn't just singing, he was commanding. Every lyric dripped with conviction, as if he had lived the struggle inside the song. Backstage, he had been terrified, but on stage, instinct took over. This was his shot, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. By the end of the set, the crowd wasn't just clapping, they were roaring. Journey hadn't just introduced a new singer, they had become a new band. When the show ended, fans spilled into the San Francisco streets buzzing with excitement. They didn't know Perry's name yet, but they knew they had seen something extraordinary. Word of mouth spread fast. Local papers wrote about the spark Journey didn't know they needed. Radio DJs began asking for recordings. Columbia Records' phones started ringing. For the band, it was clear, this wasn't just another gig. It was the night their identity shifted. From that moment on, Journey wasn't a struggling progressive group. They were a band with a voice built for arenas. But what came next would prove whether Perry was truly the savior Columbia hoped for, or just a flash of excitement in a crowded music scene, because now the real test was waiting, the recording studio. After that first show, Columbia wasted no time. They booked the band into the studio to record what would become Infinity. To help guide this new era, they brought in producer Roy Thomas Baker, fresh off his work with Queen. But the sessions weren't easy. Journey had always built songs from long instrumental jams, improvising until something clicked. Perry worked differently. He wanted melodies, hooks, and stories people could carry with them after one listen. The shift was uncomfortable. Some band members worried they were selling out. Others saw the bigger picture. This was survival. Then came Lights. Perry had written it years earlier about Los Angeles, but after moving to San Francisco, he rewrote the lyrics to honor his new home. Sean's guitar shimmered under Perry's golden voice. Suddenly, Journey had a song both radio stations and fans could embrace. Then came Wheel in the Sky. With its dramatic riff and Perry's passionate delivery, the track became a showcase of everything new about Journey. Tight, emotional, unforgettable. When Infinity hit shelves in 1978, the gamble paid off. The album reached number 21 on the Billboard charts, their best yet, and eventually went platinum. For the first time, Journey wasn't just admired, they were loved. But this was only the beginning. The real anthem, the one that would outlive them all, was still waiting to be born. By 1981, Journey was already riding high. Infinity had saved their career, and fans were pouring into arenas. But Perry, Sean, and their new keyboardist Jonathan Cain wanted more. They wanted a song that would last forever. Cain remembered advice from his father, "Don't stop believing." Simple words. But when he shared them, Perry instantly recognized their power. This wasn't just encouragement, it was a message millions could hold on to. Unlike most songs, the chorus didn't come first. They saved it for the end, building anticipation, making the audience wait. Sean added a soaring guitar riff, Cain's piano sparkled like a beacon, and Perry's voice carried the story of streetlight people and strangers waiting with raw conviction. When it was released, Don't Stop Believin' didn't hit number 1, it peaked at number 9. A solid success, but not a smash. Many thought it would fade like so many other songs of its era, but they were wrong. The song refused to disappear. It kept resurfacing through movies, sports stadiums, and eventually in the TV series Glee. Each time, a new generation discovered it. Decades later, the Library of Congress preserved it in the National Recording Registry as an essential piece of American culture. Yet for Perry, it was always more than a hit. It was a reflection of his own story, a man who nearly gave up, reminding the world and himself to keep believing. The real breakthrough came with Escape in 1981. From the opening blast of Don't Stop Believing to the tender ballad Open Arms, it was clear Journey had reached a new level. Perry's voice was at its peak, strong, emotional, precise. On Stone in Love, he soared. On Open Arms, he stripped everything back, creating one of the most iconic love songs of the decade. At first, the band worried about releasing a ballad. Would rock fans accept it? The answer came quickly. Stadiums lit up with lighters, couples swayed arm in arm, and the song climbed the charts. Perry's belief had been right. It wasn't just a ballad. It was a universal moment. Escape became a juggernaut. It hit #1 on the Billboard album charts, sold millions, and turned Journey into an arena powerhouse. Critics who had once dismissed them as corporate rock started admitting the truth: the band had heart. And at the center of it all was Steve Perry. The kid who almost quit music was now fronting one of the biggest bands in the world. But even with platinum records and sold-out arenas, Perry never forgot where it all began, that one night in San Francisco when everything changed. Years passed and Journey kept climbing. Arena tours sold out. Their songs became radio staples. Fans screamed Perry's name as if he had always been a star. But Steve Perry never forgot the night it all began. The Old Waldorf wasn't a stadium. It wasn't even close. Just a smoky San Francisco club where a few hundred fans gathered, expecting the old Journey. Instead, they got a glimpse of the future. Decades later, Perry still spoke about that night, how nervous he was backstage, palms sweaty, heart racing, how he feared fans would reject him before he had a chance to prove himself. But when Neil Schoen's guitar rang out, instinct took over. By the third song, the crowd wasn't just curious. They were leaning forward, hanging on every note. That moment, Perry later said, felt like a door finally opening. After years of standing outside, knocking in vain, it was proof he belonged. And for Journey, it was the night they stopped being a promising band and became a phenomenon. But Perry's story wasn't just about one night. It was about how that spark kept burning, even when the odds said it shouldn't. As Journey's fame exploded, Perry's voice became the band's heartbeat. Songs like Faithfully, Separate Ways, and Open Arms turned into anthems of love and longing. His performances weren't just technical showcases. They felt personal, like he was singing directly to each fan in the crowd. Fans remember him locking eyes with strangers in the arena, making them feel like the song was meant just for them. That connection, rare, almost impossible to teach, was why Journey's songs endured. When critics tried to dismiss the band as polished or corporate, Perry's sincerity silenced them. Because no matter how big the stage got, he never lost that hunger. The hunger of a man who almost gave up, who almost walked away at 29 without ever being heard. And maybe that's why the songs still work, because inside every high note, every ballad, is the echo of that one night when Perry finally got his chance. The Old Waldorf became legend, not because of where it was, but because of what happened there, the birth of a sound that would echo for decades. But how did Perry himself see it, looking back years later? The answer reveals why that night has never left him. When Steve Perry looked back on his career, the platinum albums, the stadium tours, the timeless songs sung by millions, he always circled back to that one night in San Francisco. It wasn't the biggest show, it wasn't the loudest crowd, but it was the moment he proved to himself and to the world that he belonged. He remembered the heat of the room, the way the air felt thick with possibility. He remembered the stunned silence when his voice first rang out, how people turned mid-conversation to stare at the stage. He remembered the roar at the end of the set, louder than the club could contain, as if the crowd knew they had witnessed history. For Perry, that applause wasn't about fame. It wasn't about money or magazine covers. It was about survival, about finally stepping through the door he had been banging on for years. Fans who were there still talk about it. They tell stories of walking out into the San Francisco night, buzzing with disbelief over what they had just seen. The next morning, local radio stations started calling Columbia Records, asking about the mysterious new singer. Word spread like wildfire, and by the time Infinity hit the shelves, that night had already become legend. Even decades later, when Perry was no longer touring, he spoke of the Old Waldorf as the moment his life changed forever. He carried it with him, not as a memory of triumph, but as a reminder of how close he had come to quitting, how fragile everything had been. One night, one voice, one chance, and Steve Perry took it. Steve Perry was 29 when he walked onto that stage at the Old Waldorf. To the crowd, he was just another face. To the band, he was still a risk. To Columbia Records, he was a last chance. And yet within minutes, everything changed. That night wasn't about charts, platinum records, or magazine covers. Those would come later. It wasn't even about fame, it was about belonging, about a man who had almost quit music standing in front of strangers and finally being heard. Every sold-out arena, every stadium filled with the chorus of "Don't Stop Believin'," every couple swaying to open arms, every fan who ever felt like Steve Perry was singing directly to them. It all traces back to that small club in San Francisco. That's the beauty of rock history. It doesn't always start in the biggest arenas. Sometimes it begins in a smoky room with a nervous young man gripping a microphone, praying for one last chance. And Steve Perry proved that sometimes one chance is all you need. Today, when fans look back at Journey's rise, they see more than just hits. They see the story of a voice that carried generations, of a man who almost gave up at 29, but instead rewrote rock history. And maybe that's why "Don't Stop Believin' still resonates. Because the song isn't just about holding on, it's about Perry himself. A reminder that even when the odds are against you, when the doors keep shutting, one moment can open everything. One night, one voice, forever. That was the night Steve Perry changed everything for himself, for Journey, and for rock history. But what do you think? Were you one of the fans who first heard Perry's voice live? Or do you remember the moment you first heard "Don't Stop Believin'" on the radio? Tell us in the comments, we'd love to hear your memories. And if you want more untold stories from the legends of music, hit subscribe to RetroWaves, because the next story we share will surprise you even more.